As we continue our commemoration of the 40th anniversary of Home Rule, now we have convened 3 of the surviving elected members of the first City Council. Joining us are Chairman Sterling Tucker, Ward 5 Council Member William Spalding, and Ward 8 Council Member Reverend James Coates. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
The very first members of the City Council were responsible for establishing the protocols, the rules and regulations for the legislative process and other fundamentals for the operation and management of the district government. These members brought with them various experiences in public and private life that helped shape the operation of the City Council and the district government. So, gentlemen, let's begin. I'll direct the first question to Chairman Tucker. Provide us with some insight into your role as the leader in the Urban League, combined with leadership in the struggle for Home Rule.
Well, I came to Washington in 1956, and Home Rule was a distant, not even a vision at that time. There was, however, activity that was going on to achieve it. The Urban League was very actively involved in trying to get it and trying to help move the community forward. I was also at that time an appointed member later of the City Council before we had an election, and I also served then as chairman of the Home Rule Committee for the District of Columbia. It was not a formal committee, it was not a governmentally appointed committee, just a committee of citizens who were seeking Home Rule. So we were involved, therefore, from that angle, from the Urban League, and also from the angle of being chairman of the Home Rule Committee at that time. Deeply committed, deeply involved with lots of good people like the people sitting here.
So actually, I'm going to open up that question to the other members of our distinguished panel. I'll start with Mr. Spalding. Provide us with some insight in your role and involvement in the struggle for Home Rule.
Well, my struggle for Home Rule was really that first I was here for a number of years and working in government, and the application came up for people to run for the City Council, so I decided that I would run because I had been so involved in the community. And I did run, and fortunately was elected rather, and so that's how I got into it, and from there I just went forward.
Okay, very good. Reverend Coates.
Ward 8, in my first experience of being energized, was the dumping ground for what was termed urban renewal. The southwest sector was renewed, and the negative impacts of not just hundreds but thousands relocated in the spaces of Ward 8 without adequate services, educational, etc. And it was being energized and also sensing the misery and pain that fostered my first consideration, raising the question, what could be done? And obviously at that point we did not have Home Rule. We had something that served as the leadership of the city. At times it made the pretense that it was concerned, but the bottom line was nothing was done. So we had schools overcrowded, we had substandard housing that was allowed to be built without consideration of zoning, adequate architectural design, and other concerns, proliferation, escalation of police brutality and insensitivity. So those and some other things were a part of what energized me.
And some of those things are still continuing today.
Yes. However, not as they were before, and I credit the leadership of the first elected DC City Council the Honorable Sterling Tucker and others for moving us beyond what at that point was very painful.
Okay. Fascinating. We're going to go on to another topic, and I'll start again with Chairman Tucker. As you know, the Board of Commissioners was the longest form of governance in the district from 1878 to 1967, when Congress modified the city's charter with the mayor-commissioner form of government. What were the benefits and liabilities for this change in government from the Board of Commissioners to the mayor-commissioner?
Well, neither group had much power. Congress retained its power. We had the Board of Commissioners. We had 3 commissioners appointed by the President of the United States. One was an engineer commissioner, and others were citizens. Generally, one was a lawyer, and otherwise. They took their orders from Capitol Hill, limited authority, not a great deal of responsibility, more ceremonial positions, but served as best they could under those circumstances. We then got the mayor commission form of government was appointed by then President Lyndon Johnson, and he decided that we wanted to. He was going to. He tried to reorganize the city council, tried to get the vote, and couldn't get it. He decided he would reorganize the government as though it was a department of the federal government, and using his presidential power then in that capacity. And that's how we came about with that form of government, the appointed government. I remember when the first people appointed, he said to them, now, act like you've been elected. You know, in other words, relate to the people. And that group, but they didn't get any additional power, and not additional authority, some additional responsibility. But we did feel like we had a government because we had appointed members of the city council, and we had an appointed mayor commissioner. The law didn't allow us to call him a mayor. He was a commissioner, but we all began calling him the mayor. Still, that was very limited. In that time, we did try to make another move. We got President Kennedy to appoint someone as the White House representative. In other words, a special assistant to the president for the District of Columbia. That gave us a representative in the White House, you know, to give us more access to the White House. Many of the commissioners were not too happy about that because they felt that what limited authority they had now would go to this person. But the person who was appointed up, his name was Charlie Horsky, very good man, very fine lawyer in the community. But we were moving along, and we got more citizen involvement, more activity. The need and the appetite for home rule grew stronger and stronger, and we knew we were making some progress.
Yeah. But just quickly picking on what you said you were not supposed to call him mayor, but did residents call him mayor as well?
We did, but nobody on Capitol Hill, nobody in the Congress would call him mayor, you know. But we started calling him mayor, and but in the law, that was not what the title was.
Right.
That limited authority that was given at that time.
Okay. We just have about a minute to go, but we'll have another segment. But I just wanted to ask you quickly, who were the major players and activists in the Home Rule movement, and what were their campaign platforms in making their argument for Home Rule? And I'll start with you, Mr. Spaulding.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was not very involved in the running of government prior to the movement of Home Rules, because I was working in federal government, and I had a very good job. And it was I say good because it enabled me to run and get information and experience that was very limited. So that's what I spent the original time in doing.
Okay. You'll tell us more about that after this break, but right now we have to take a short break. We'll be back with more in just a moment. And welcome back. We're continuing our fascinating discussion about home rule, and I'm going to jump right back in with this question, and I'll go to Reverend Coates on this one. The Home Rule Act was passed by Congress and signed by President Nixon on December 26, 1973. Despite the success of this legislative achievement, and what leverage, momentum, and synergy of hope did it provide in the continuing struggle for full and complete home rule?
Again, as I said earlier, my singular focus, in contrast to citywide concern, although some of the issues in Ward 8 were reflected on a citywide basis, my focus was specifically in Ward 8, and more specifically in the area of education. I mentioned the dislocation of Southwest residents moved into that area. The resulting overcrowding of schools was certainly problematic, and we went everywhere we could trying to get some response, specifically raising the capital improvements budget for schools and what have you. So that when home rule came, it gave Ward 8, and certainly I considered Ward 8's issues, a higher level of engagement that whereas before we were restricted to the departmental heads and what have you. When home rule was adopted, it then generated a synergy, a lot of synergy, as to these persons have to run on platforms that hopefully reflect the needs and interests of the citizens, and it was satisfying. I think at some points we were overly ambitious as to what could be achieved in the short term, but at least it was a start.
Okay. Before we move on, Chairman Tucker, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'd only comment. I think it's important to note that we got an elected government under a Republican president. The President Kennedy and President Johnson each moved a little bit, the ball a little bit down the road, but it was President Nixon and whom we got, we should note that as part of the history of home rule, point that out. Secondly, by getting an elected city council made a huge difference, elected mayor and elected city council, because we then were representatives of the people truly, because they had selected us as their representatives. And we had to be very careful that we put together a kind of government that would allow us to utilize the power that we had and push that umbrella as far as we could, to the extent that we could. And we did laid a real foundation for lots of activity where the community could really be represented by those who they elected to public office. That gave us a start for a grand opportunity to move this government forward.
Okay. So moving on, the first election under the new Home Rule Charter was held on November 5th, 1974, and all of you were among the winning candidates. Share with us your campaign platform to serve the citizens of the district as their newly elected representatives. And we'll start first with Mr. Spalding.
Well, prior to the elections, I was very fortunate to have had a tremendous experience in the technology and educational activities. So I decided that I would run for government, for elections, so that I could bring to the city the benefits and the advantages that could be achieved by making it available to the general public, and especially the young folk, this advancement in technology.
You sound just as passionate about that as you probably did back then. So tell us, how do you feel about that, your campaigns and platform for that period?
There were several critical elements in my campaign. One of them had to do with mass transit services. The bus lines that were generating the greatest revenue were the A buses running through Anacostia and Congress Heights. It was clear that the alignment for the subway did not serve the mass transit-dependent population in Anacostia and Congress Heights. On the onset of Home Rule, it would come across the bridge and turn up Good Hope Road and Naylor Road, and certainly would not go through Anacostia and Congress Heights. So that was a major platform activity, and I celebrate today, even now, that when this issue was brought to the awareness of the chairperson of the City Council, Sterling Tuck, and also the first elected mayor, Walter Washington.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time. You see, this conversation is fast as we go on and on. But we're going to have to take.
They supported a realignment with the result that the subway does run through the mass transit-dependent population area.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We have to take a break, but we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to our discussion. Gentlemen, this is a rather short segment, but so I'm going to go quickly. Can you enlighten us on the campaign issues between Mayor Washington and Clifford Alexander during the first election of a mayor under Home Rule? And so, Chairman Tucker, I'll direct that to you.
I don't think there were any particular differences as to what needed to be done. One of the major problems that Walter Washington faced, Mayor Washington faced, was that he had been the appointed mayor for 6 years. And there was a general feeling, I'd not say general feeling, but has he been there long enough? And his campaign effort was to say that, look, but I was appointed, not elected. Give me a chance. I've only been 4 years as an elected mayor. I want to be elected mayor. And so that was the issue mainly there. Clifford Alexander was a very attractive person, had been in the White House for President Kennedy, and was enormous. It was a very popular election. Both of them had strong supporters, and it turned out, as it was anticipated, but very close.
Thank you very much. So the next question, what was among the first business agenda items the council addressed during the early years from 1974 to 1978? And I'll go to Councilmember Spalding first.
Well, yes, the items that were made available, I was primarily interested in what I could contribute. And as I reached out, the assignments were made to all of the members, and they were a little slow in making an assignment to me. So when I raised this issue, they said, well, yes, you can have the responsibility of establishing an educational format for the district. So I was established the responsibility of looking at the education that's needed and establishing the institutions and practices that were required. So then that's when the idea of the establishment of the university came into being, and I was appointed, given the responsibility to pursue that.
Very good. And then finally, we have about a minute left.
A minute left. As chair of the Economic Development Committee, one issue was the lack of, redlining low-income areas. We held hearings and focused on that. Also, another issue was the matter of investment in South Africa, apartheid, and the city council adopted a resolution urging the district government agencies not to contract with any entity doing business in South Africa. And then finally, the idea that minority contractors were not given a fair share of the DC government dollar. And we introduced legislation, and the council adopted at that point, relatively now low level, at least 10% of every city dollar for contracts would go to bona fide minorities.
Thank you so
We
much.
also passed the gun control bill. And
Yes.
that was a major piece of legislation that we got
And
through
that's
in
still,
that council.
still in the
yes.
news today. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being a part of this panel today. Thank you for stopping by and giving your insight. That's it for this segment. We'll be right back with more of our commemoration of the 40th anniversary of Home Rule. We'll be right back after this. And now we're joined by former at-large council member, the Reverend Dr. Jerry Moore. Thanks so much for coming by to talk with us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, first off, you were the only Republican member of the council.
That is right.
Tell us about your role as an appointed council member.
Well, assignments were made to council members. The only committee available was the Human Resources Committee. It contained everything: trash, water, air, all things were in it. Transportation, and I had the whole package.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
A lot of responsibility.
Right. So, can you enlighten us on the campaign issues between Mayor Washington and Clifford Alexander during that first election of a mayor under Home Rule?
Well, Mayor Commissioner Washington was a very crafty person. He managed to get along with Clifford, and he knew how to get around him. Clifford was a smart fellow, but he wasn't as crafty as Washington was. And Washington always found a way to get his point across.
Very interesting. Next question. What was among the first business agenda items the council addressed during the early years from 1974 to 1978?
Well, we had the question of the Potomac River to deal with. It was polluted by water coming down from Maryland. They were dumping their sewage in the Potomac River, and it was coming down to us. And we were getting our water out of the river for the two reservoirs that we have. So we had to deal with that problem.
So that was quite a lot to deal with.
Quite a bit to deal with.
Well,
All I wanted was ready.
you had your hands full. Next question. Describe the relationship between the mayor and the city council in the legislative and budgetary process and managing the affairs of the city.
Well, although we had what was called Home Rule, Congress still had control, and we had to please Congress whether we liked it or not.
Wow.
You had the District of Columbia Senate Committee, and the Senate Committee held tight reins on what we did in the District of Columbia. They reviewed our budget, they confirmed what we could do and couldn't do, they approved our money and sent it back to us. Usually, we pay whatever they approve.
And some of that continues today. Just finally, we just have a few seconds for this one. Discuss the relationship between the White House and Congress during your tenure as elected official during that early period of home rule.
Well, I was nominated by Richard Nixon. I had access to the White House. It so happened that his secretary was a very dear friend of a friend of mine. If I wanted him to know something, I told her. And she told the secretary, and she told Nixon, and it was done.
Amazing. Amazing access back then. I want to thank you so much for talking with us, Reverend Dr. Moore, and appreciate your stopping by.
It's been a pleasure, and I thank you very much.
All right. That wraps up this portion of our commemoration of the 40th anniversary of Home Rule. It's been a fascinating and informative discussion today. Most importantly, I want to thank all of our distinguished panel again for their participation. I'm Furman Patterson, and thank you so much for joining us.